Today's scripture reading brings us to 1 Samuel chapter 18. I have this chapter broken down into three different sections, and the first one is verses 1 through 11. And I have that titled Relationships of Saul, David, and Jonathan, because at the beginning of this chapter you see how David and Jonathan's hearts were just knit together, and they were brothers from another mother, right? They loved each other just as close as friends certainly could. And make no mistake, in our day and age, with sodomy being the way it is and promoted so heavily, some people are trying to read into the relationship between David and Jonathan and say that this was more than a friendship. That's not the case. So anyway, I hate to even have to address that, but man, our society is something else right now. Anyway, you see David and Jonathan's relationship, that is detailed. And then you see Saul and David, they are growing estranged. And the reason why they are growing estranged is not because David has offended in any way, but because Saul's pride has been lifted up and has provoked him to jealousy. And all because verse number 7. Verse number 7 said, "And the women answered one another as they played and said, Saul hath slayed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And it says there in the next verse, he was very wroth, and he repeats, they're saying this, that I've slayed my thousands, but David has slayed his 10,000s. And I was thinking, how I would feel. It escapes me not that a multitude of other preachers can preach better than me, right? And I don't care. If I had someone say, man, he preaches 1,000 messages real good and so preaches 10,000 real good, I would just be pleased that they were saying I did good that many times, right? That's just me. But Saul, even though they were boasting about him, because they weren't boasting about him as grand as they were David, then that provoked him to jealousy to where he wanted to kill David. And twice it says there in these verses that he had tried to kill him, and David had to flee from his presence. And then verses 12 through 26, I have that titled, Saul Conspires to Kill David. So in this passage of Scripture, we see that Saul is trying to bring down David, but not by his own hand. He uses his daughter and then daughters as bait to try to use them as pawns in a game in order to kill this young man who has done nothing but good to him and wonders for his nation. And if you see this in verse number 12, it says, and Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him and was departed from Saul. So Saul is evidently not ignorant of the fact that God is with David and God is not with him anymore. What makes this so amazing is that Saul, being cognizant of the fact that the Lord is with David, somehow Saul still thought in his mind that he could usurp God. I mean, if God be for us, who can be against us, right? Well, if God was for David, how in the world could Saul begin to think that he could bring down David? It's not going to happen. Who is a man that he can fight against God? We see in verse number 16 that David is a man of the people. All of Israel and Judah loved him because he went out and came in before them. And verse number 18 really shows us the contrast between Saul and David. While Saul is being lifted up with pride, David is a man of humility. Verse number 18, when it's known that, he's possibly is going to marry the king's daughter, he says, who am I? And what is my life or my father's family in Israel that I should be son-in-law to the king? David was so full of humility, but yet Saul was so lifted up with pride. And that's how you see that David is a man after God's own heart. When we think about how the Lord of glory would leave heaven and come down here, gird himself with a towel and wash the feet of dirty, rotten sinners, Judas being one of them, that's humility. David is certainly showing that here. And in verses 27 through 30, so Saul's conspiring to kill David, and he says, all right, this is what we'll do. You need no dowry. And we see that in verse number 23. Seeing that I am a poor man and lightly esteemed, David is saying, I have no way to pay a dowry for the daughter of the king, right? He was too poor to be able to pay a dowry unto him. And so that's why it continues on. And Saul sends word, hey, he'll not require any dowry. You don't have to pay him any money. Just go and get 100 foreskins from the Philistines. And David jumps right on it. He goes out, doesn't get 100, he gets 200 foreskins. And I don't know what he did. I don't know if he got like a chain and put them on like a necklace. I don't know. I thought about that. How do you present something like that to the king? But however it is, he did it. 200 foreskins unto Saul, and then so Saul gives Michal unto him to marry. And so verses 27 through 30 is Saul's conspiracy fails, and David marries Michal. And there's a couple themes that I want you to notice throughout the entirety of this chapter. Number one, we see Saul's fear. We see that in verse number 12, verse number 15, verse number 29. And then another theme that we see is David's wisdom, and that is in verse 5, verses 14 and 15, and verse number 30. And then another theme on a less note, I think it's only mentioned twice, but it speaks about how the Lord is with David. So that's some of the major themes that's coming out of verse number 18 of 1 Samuel. So I hope this has been a help and blessing to you. I hope you're enjoying your study of the early kingdom of Israel in the book of 1 Samuel. God bless you. Look forward to seeing you soon.